In the cold, sterile halls of St. Mary's Hospital, a small child sat alone on a hard wooden bench, swinging her feet back and forth, watching as strangers passed by her without a glance. Her name was Lily, and she was only 6 years old, but the weight of the world already pressed heavily on her tiny shoulders. She didn't fully understand why her mother hadn't come back. "I'll be right back," were the last words her mother had whispered to her before walking out of the hospital doors. But hours turned into days, and days into weeks. That promise had faded with time, much like the memories of her mother's face, which grew blurrier each day. Lily's heart ached with a longing she couldn't put into words. She wanted to ask, to understand, but no one had answers. The hospital staff were kind enough, offering her blankets and meals, but it wasn't the warmth of her mother's arms or the sound of her father's voice that she so desperately craved. The days bled into one another as Lily sat in the same spot, staring out the window, waiting, always waiting. In her mind, her mother would come back. She had to. But deep down, as the days passed, Lily started to feel the heavy realization settle in her chest. Her mother wasn't coming back. She had been left behind, discarded like an old toy no one wanted to play with anymore. The thought was too much for her young heart to bear, so she clung to the only hope she had left, that maybe, just maybe, someone else would come for her. One day a nurse came and took Lily by the hand. Her name was Sister Anne, a kind woman with sad eyes. "We're going on a little trip," she said, smiling gently. Lily didn't ask questions. She just followed. It wasn't long before they arrived at a new place, an orphanage. The building was large, gray, and imposing. The air felt heavy, and Lily could hear the echoes of children laughing and crying in the distance. Inside there were dozens of other children, some younger than her, some older. They were all like her, lost and forgotten, left behind by families who couldn't or wouldn't take care of them. At first, the orphanage felt like a prison, a reminder of everything she had lost. Each room was filled with children, but it felt so incredibly lonely. The days were long, filled with routines, meals, school, chores. It was all mechanical, devoid of warmth or love. Lily often sat by the window in her small room, watching the rain fall, imagining her mother walking through the gates to take her home. She dreamed of it every night, but when she woke, reality crashed down around her. Years passed, and the hope she once clung to faded. Each birthday, each Christmas, she wished for the same thing, that her parents would come back for her. But they never did. Every time someone came to adopt a child, Lily would sit up straighter, her heart pounding in her chest, hoping they would choose her. She would smile, be on her best behavior, desperate to be noticed, to be wanted, but each time the families passed her by, choosing other children, younger children. One by one, the kids she had grown close to were taken away, adopted by strangers, leaving Lily behind. Soon, she was one of the older kids in the orphanage, too old for most families to consider. People didn't want older children, she realized. They wanted babies, blank slates they could mold into their own. But Lily had memories, a past. She had a history of abandonment, and that made her a risk. By the time she was 12, Lily stopped hoping for a family. She stopped imagining her mother's return or a magical reunion with parents who had changed their minds. She hardened herself, building walls around her heart to protect herself from the constant disappointments. She became quiet, withdrawn, a shadow among the other children. No longer the bright-eyed little girl who believed in happy endings. Lily now only believed in the cold reality of being unwanted. Despite the wall she built, there was still a small part of her, deep inside, that longed for love. It was the part of her that ached when she saw the younger kids being hugged by prospective parents, or when the other children talked about being chosen. She tried to push it down to convince herself that she didn't need anyone, that she was fine on her own, but the truth was, she wasn't fine. She was just surviving. One night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she heard the softest of whispers in the wind. It was a memory, a fragment of her mother's voice telling her, "I'll be right back." The words echoed in her mind, but now, instead of offering comfort, they filled her with anger. Why didn't her mother come back? What had she done wrong? Wasn't she good enough? These questions haunted her every day. She had been a good child, quiet, polite, never causing trouble, yet it hadn't been enough to keep her parents from leaving. As the years went on, the visits from prospective parents dwindled. Soon, Lily was a teenager, and everyone knew that teenagers rarely got adopted. She prepared herself for the reality of aging out of the system, of being sent into the world alone with no family, no support. The thought terrified her, but she didn't show it. She had become good at hiding her fear. At 16, Lily stood at the same window she had so many times before, watching the rain fall in sheets outside the orphanage. Her reflection stared back at her, a young woman now, no longer the small, hopeful child she once was. There was a sadness in her eyes, a tiredness far beyond her years. "I don't need anyone," she whispered to herself, as if saying it aloud would make it true. But the tears that silently slid down her cheeks told a different story. She still longed for a family, for someone to love her, to tell her that she mattered, that she wasn't forgotten. But that was a dream for another life, one where she hadn't been abandoned, one where love didn't feel like something just out of reach. And so, with a heavy heart and tear-filled eyes, Lily turned away from the window, stepping back into the lonely world that had become her reality. The ache in her heart was one she would carry forever, a longing for a family she had never truly known, a dream that would never come true. In the end, she was the abandoned child, lost in a world that had no place for her, and no matter how much time passed, she would always carry the weight of that abandonment, a silent reminder of the love she never found.